Proportional Response. Book 1, Chapter 22, Part 9. A Gift Horse's Other Shoe. Kaz involuntarily sat forward slightly in his chair as sounds of surprise and alarm spread through the council chamber. A rumbling noise of anger and protest began to sound. The Penigra had planned to just sneak whoever they wanted into the Republic, and had that in a punishment decree. How? The Baitha waved a lower arm through a control, and highlighted documents appeared on all screens. They showed the relevant portions of the Penigra proposal, buried deep in some of the appendices. His translator couldn't make sense of the words, informing him that it was written in one of the Penigran languages not loaded into most translators. A translation appeared in between the lines of text, however, and revealed a segment which gave the Penigra sole discretion over who they sent, and explicitly forbid any attempts at review by third parties. The rumble continued, but changed pitch slightly, and suddenly seemed directed at the Penigra instead of Ingthal, who raised all four arms for quiet and continued to speak.
We Baitha are familiar with Penigran contracts and the ways in which they hide clauses. Indeed, we've been fighting just such a contract for centuries in regards to the same nutrient paste which is in the middle of this whole affair. In that vein, I come to both our proposal on how we, the humble Baitha, will pay for the massive undertaking we are willing to shoulder, and, at the same time, provide punitive measures for the Penigra that do not give them some secret benefit. Wish to be allowed to produce and sell our nutrient paste to all parties without restriction for the duration of the conflict, or until the Penigra have increased their own production sufficiently to meet wartime demands.
Kaz felt the air go out of his lungs and had to fight a smile at the same time. Part of him felt elated, the other braced for impact. He typed furiously on his leg.
We couldn't have come up with a better proposal if we had planned it ourselves. So why am I bracing for impact as if I was on a ship about to hit an asteroid twice its mass? Golnar. Because you have finally gained a little bit of the healthy paranoia I have been trying to teach you, love. When things go your way in a manner you don't expect, you should always have your eyes out for a trap. But Yoro. This time though, I don't think we have to be worried about a trap. Something about all of this is strange, but the Baitha and Penigra have been at each other for so long with this nutrient paste thing that this just looks like targets of opportunity.
Ambassador Infgal allowed the tumult caused by his comments to die down a moment before raising all four of his arms in a request for attention.
Please, my fellow councillors, I have a limited time to speak and the clock is ticking. The Baitha further pledge that all profits collected from the foreign sale of our paste, which are not needed for the efforts to help the poor refugees, will go to the council military fund, so that those of us who do not wish to become involved in the conflict may better have our rights protected. Minus the standard wartime margin for our companies producing the paste, of course. Now, do not get me wrong here, ambassadors. This proposal is not one to allow the Baitha to violate the tacit agreements we have with the council about keeping our nutrient paste sales internal. In fact, there will be specific language in the proposal that our wartime efforts should, in no way, be construed as a resolution to the ongoing dispute over the rights to the paste that we have with the Penigra. We believe that matter should be settled after the war as a separate issue. If any of you wish to ask questions of my staff this evening after the session, please feel free to do so. I, however, will be very busy working with my legal team on drafts of this proposal. Thank you for your time, which I seem to be out of.
The Baitha began to guide his platform back to its appointed space on the chamber wall. At the exact moment his timer hit 0. The doors opened, and everyone began to filter out of the chamber, many muttering to one another or their staff. Kazlor, however, found himself rooted to his seat, and stayed in the empty chamber until well after the lights went out. Enebel sat in his living room within the embassy and found he couldn't keep the smile off his face, despite the somewhat sour mood of Kaz and Golnar. Yoro seemed, well, like Yoro, absorbed in whatever she had displayed on her glasses. I wonder how much of the time she's just playing games, and we don't know it. They all sat and talked about the day's events in the council chamber, going over it all as best they could, while they nursed their drink of choice and tried to unwind from the stress of the day, while waiting for Henry's secure call. I am glad we brought the secure link in here. Securing my living quarters from prying eyes certainly had side benefits, of course, but being able to have these conferences in comfort is appealing. Still, I wish I could share Kaz and Golna's concerns over the Bather and the Penigra, but I don't. What's that human phrase? Never look a gift raccoon in the mouth? No, I think that is the wrong animal. The screen tied to the secure line came to life, ending his reverie. Henry appeared on the screen, and though he wore a broad smile, the man looked worried. This, at last, brought Enable down from his own cheerful mood. If Henry is worried, Kaz spoke first.
I hate to be one to naysay good news, but I don't like this. What is that human phrase of yours? Waiting for the other foot to land. Things went far too well in our favor today, and while I admit it is nice to see those bloody birds knock down a peg and see them called to the carpet for their quiet support of the Sultan, it just makes me itch when things go better planned. Still, Yoro and her analysts assure me that Ingthol, taking advantage of a chance to bloody a Pinigran nose, is consistent with what she expects.
Golna put a gentle hand over her husband's.
The actions of the Penigra are what concern me, even though our wife doesn't agree. I will admit that their actions are not entirely out of character. For the entire existence of the Council, the only two species the birds have ever been willing to back are us, because we are the third most powerful and a monarchy, and the Exultant, because they are the only ones who came close to them in terms of military might and economic capability. But still, it is somewhat unlike them to really stick their necks out like this, and even more strange for them to be willing to take on blame when they didn't have to. The only thing the Penigra want is to be...
Henry raised a hand.
Left alone to pursue their own internal squabbles. So my staff has been telling me until the words are nearly etched into my screen.
Henry gave Golna a slightly wan smile.
I do hear you, beautiful, don't get me wrong, and part of me is inclined to agree with you, but my intel staff disagrees. Means, motive, opportunity. These are the things to look for when trying to solve a crime, or when trying to determine if a conspiracy really exists. I will admit that the Penigra have the means and opportunity, but no one can find a motive which isn't truly outlandish for this to be any more than what it seems on the surface. The Penigra doing what the Sultans asked, because they believe Salt. Victory is inevitable, and want these matters settled, so they can pay more attention to their own internal backstabbing and skirmishes. Did you know that their king has forbidden armed conflict, both dagger and warfare, between the houses until this war is over?
Yoro let out a long, low whistle.
I can't say I'm surprised, but I didn't know that. It actually reduces my concerns a bit though, in that it means the birds are taking this seriously, and realize that there may in fact be a change in balance of power on the League. Stopping their own internal warfare is something they have only done a handful of times in the League's history, always when the Zoltans felt threatened in some way.
They all fell to a discussion of the history of the Penigra, their military power, and so on and so forth. The kinds of things that Enable let them deal with. His purpose was to get people to the table and keep them talking once they were there. This military stuff just made his head spin and his hearts hurt. The thought of things making his head spin brought Enable's mind back to the strange note a courier handed him after the session. It had been from the Bither. The disintegrating paper and other anti-camera tricks on the ink proved that he just didn't like the fact that he'd been given an odd little piece of metal, which reminded him of something, some everyday thing that would make him feel stupid when he recognized it, he was sure. Nor did he like the cryptic words on the note. The wire is ours. What could that possibly mean? He shook his head to try to banish the worry and looked around the room for his datapad. He could get some light reading in while setting the thing to record and pretending to take notes. A strange movement caught his eye. Something seemed to be slithering around the line from the human embassy, which came up through his coffee table and fed to the hollow emitter. Enable slid out of his chair and leaned in to get a closer look, curious enough that he didn't even notice when all the rest of the conversation stopped and everyone had started to stare at him. He felt his eyebrows draw together as he recognized the slow, snake-like object, a wire very similar to the one already plugged into his hollow emitter. A large hand grasped his shoulder and flung him back into his seat with enough force that the stuffed armchair almost spilled him out the back. Kaz stood, one hand out to protect something, the other training a pulse pistol on the wire. "The wire is ours." Understanding blossomed in Enable's mind, and he held up a hand while he shouted, "Wait!" Everyone turned to look at him, though Kaz seemed to, somehow, keep one eye on him and one on the wire.
"It is from the Bither. I got a rather cryptic self-destructing note earlier today. That, and who else has the microtech to follow the human's wire up through our foundation without setting off alarms nor sensors? Either Henry here is messing with us, or the Bither have something to say they don't want anyone else hearing."
Kaz looked around the room, and his wives each shrugged at him. The Duke finally turned to Henry, who gave a lopsided smile and gestured to go ahead. Kaz looked at him and cocked a single eyebrow, and Enable remembered the odd piece of metal which came with the note. He handed it out to Kaz, who, in turn, handed it to Yoro. She looked at it intently for a moment, then a moment more. She has to have recognized what that is instantly. She must be doing something else. What all can those glasses of hers do, anyway? Yoro nodded in satisfaction and leaned forward to attach the metal to the wire. Her eyebrows went up in surprise as the wire seemed to feed itself into the piece of metal, and the metal responded by flattening out a bit where the wire entered. Yoro muttered something under her breath, but dutifully plugged the wire into an open port on the hollow emitter. An image of Ambassador Inkthal sprang into view next to Henry. The Bither looked around at them and spoke without preamble.
"I want in.